Last week at one of the PAX events, they showed off a hour-long demonstration video of a pre-alpha stage for Baldur's Gate 3. Now, because this is so early in development, because it's a pre-alpha, I'm probably going to be a little bit easier on it than I would for a lot of other games that would be shown. Typically when a game is shown, it's in a beta stage, or they've actually got a good chunk of it done. Hell, Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't even have a release date yet. So I am being a bit easier on this than I think I would be otherwise, but I am still judging it based on what we've seen, what we know. So one of the biggest complaints that I've seen from people is that this isn't so much Baldur's Gate 3 as Divinity Original Sin 3 with a Baldur's Gate or D&D coat of paint slapped onto it. To which I say, yeah, that's an effect of the early demo that we've been given, but also considering how weird and janky a lot of D&D stuff can be, and how well Original Sin, particularly 2, was designed and implemented, I'm perfectly fine with that. I doubt it's going to be as bad as what we saw in this demonstration. I am absolutely certain they're going to change the, well, icons for a lot of the attacks and moves. For instance, that was one of the biggest comparisons, is that they're literally using Divinity icons and symbols for all of these moves, and that is absolutely pre-alpha. I am in no way certain that this is a final build. They're going to change that up. They're going to have their own things. They're going to bring in D&D official terminology, symbols, etc. That I'm absolutely certain of, especially when we get to actually having a release date. That's probably when we're going to see that implementation put in. The part that I will say is a bit weird to me is how it goes to sort of this first-person slash third-person cinematic mode every single time there's any kind of dialogue. This is very reminiscent of what we've seen from Wasteland 3, and while I'm okay with it in idea, it's going to be one of those things that I have to see and deal with myself in a much longer session to be able to determine if it's a good idea or not. Because as it's done in the demonstration that I showed, it looks like it's fine, especially because you actually get full dialogue choices rather than a friggin' dialogue wheel that they do not describe what you're saying with. Thank you, Fallout 4. And from what I've seen, and this could be just because all of the videos that I saw, they skipped it, it looks like most of the dialogue choices aren't voiced. Now, that could be because they haven't put that in yet, or they're trying to stick to a more traditional CRPG where you are the silent protagonist, and you are saying, or in most instances, in this case, thinking, your things, and then everyone else is responding to you, but they are fully voiced. And that would be interesting from a nostalgia perspective. I think, though, that it's given how high production Larian usually goes and how much money Wizards of the Coast is, I would assume, throwing at this, that all of the dialogue from NPCs is going to be voiced. Now, as far as that's the other aspect I've heard people complain about, is that it's a lot of thinking dialogue rather than explicitly saying dialogue, and that one, there's actually a story-relevant reason. You got a fucking slug in your brain, and that's kind of made you telepathic with a lot of other people for at least a little bit. I figure that's probably going to be the first portion or the first act of the game. and then it's going to change to actually direct dialogue. So that I don't see staying as the main thing. I could be completely wrong on that, and that's the idea that they want to roll with. In which case, again, I'd have to see how that plays out, but internal dialogue does seem a bit weirder and a bit more of an odd choice to me. That one I will grant. The combat, ignoring the names or the symbols for the abilities, the combat itself looks nice. It's very much in line with D&D, and I think that this is why Wizards went with Larian, because Divinity 2's combat system was very easy to transition to a D&D style combat. Now, there's a lot more misses in this than what you may have seen from a typical Divinity 2 game. That is traditional D&D. Thank you, rolls, for bloody everything. But also, in the early games of Divinity 2, you were missing a lot, or doing a lot of low damage compared to what you could do in later games. I would also like to use Pathfinder Kingmaker as an example here. That game is a relatively faithful one-to-one translation of D&D to a video game, and in the early game at low levels there is a lot of missing or a lot of low damage, and then as you get higher you're friggin' getting crits all the time, you're doing insane amounts of damage. So I do believe that this was just because early game and low level. I think that the combat is going to get a lot faster and a lot better later on. I'm liking the look, the feel of the characters. I'm liking that we're getting some races that we've never seen or never been able to play as or with in a D&D video game. I can't remember exactly. I think it was 8 races, 19 classes, something like that. That's a pretty fair offering for D&D. I would have, considering how many races they have, I would have liked more, but I believe that it is for story constraints, so I'm willing to work with that. I'm wondering if we're going to see a few of the classic Baldur's Gate characters that are still around in Baldur's Gate 3, because there's a few of them that in the D&D books, they're still alive, they're still kicking, they're still doing their own thing. Minsk being the big one, of course. How he's still around 100 years later is a bit weird. I'm not going to go into details about that, but I would be shocked if at the very least they didn't make cameos. But then Larian might not want to try and bring those back for the nostalgia hit. They may actually try to do their own thing and not live on the past efforts of others. That's a very Larian style thing, and if they aren't in there, I won't be shocked, but I'm kind of expecting some to be in there, or some winks, some nods, some Easter eggs, something like that. The environmental effects, the abilities to mess with positioning and the environment entirely, that is classic D&D and classic Larian, so it makes perfect sense the way that's implemented in this. I really like that it actually shows you the role that you're doing when you do like a charisma check or a deception check or whatever. I like that it actually has the role as that dialogue is going on. That is, to me, that's neat. To other people, I can absolutely see how that is immersion breaking. But I'm looking at this as a interactive video game D&D session, and I like when that's happening visually rather than happening behind the scenes, and then it'll tell you if you got it or not later on. And then, especially, again, I'll use Pathfinder as the example. You got to reload and try and get it if your save's coming, and trying to get all these things to succeed or see what would happen if you succeeded. Whereas here, you'll know instantly, and you'll know, okay, I didn't get what I wanted, or I got what I wanted, and that's why this happened. And I believe that they have announced that this is, while they showed the turn-based, this will also have a real-time with pause option, much like Divinity 2 did, or at the very least, they're going to implement that later on. I would be absolutely shocked if they didn't. Uh, Personally, I prefer the turn-based because it's more classic D&D, and I prefer turn-based combat in my RPGs. Some people prefer the more Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 turn-based with pause style, or real-time with pause style, and I would, again, not be surprised if they brought that back because there are so many people that like that in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. Overall, I think that while the argument that this is Divinity Original Sin 3 rather than Baldur's Gate 3 is overstated, I get why people are saying that. I really do. That said, because it's so early and because Divinity 2 was so good and already was so much in line with a sort of D&D style, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think as the months go on and we see more and further development, especially when we hit the beta stage, we're going to see this game more come into its own rather than be attached to Divinity. But either way, this is not a bad sign. I view this as a good sign. That with how well done, with how well polished, with how well thought out Divinity 2 was, this being closer to Divinity 3 than most modern BioWare stuff is a good thing. I'm looking forward to seeing further and further developments, and as we get closer to release date, especially the beta, that's where I'm going to be very hard on this game. As soon as we see some kind of beta, that's where I'm going to nitpick every single detail I can find about this. Until then, I am very happy with what I've seen, and I think that this game is coming along quite nicely. I am very excited for this still, and I cannot wait to be able to play this game. I can almost guarantee, short of them absolutely fucking up in a way I can't think of, I will be playing this game day one. I am the sucker they are trying to bait. I admit that. Anyway, this has been Math Machine, just giving my thoughts and rants on Baldur's Gate 3, and I am just wanting to see more of this. Give me more, Larian. Don't let me wait for another 6 months. Please, I'm begging you. That was torture. Peace out.